grew up in Wisconsin, about a 4-hour drive from Minneapolis. It's always been one of my favorite cities in the entire country. It's also a place I've always dreamed of living someday, so if you know any jobs, just let me know. I really love it here, and I know it's been an incredibly hard time for you all, and I just really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I know that it's a privilege to be here, and I really appreciate Majors and Quinn for hosting us tonight, and thank you to Megan for doing this with me.
Well, you get your pages. So a quick housekeeping thing. The order of events is going to be Melissa's going to read, then we're going to be in conversation. With a smaller event, if there is something you want me to say, Melissa, say more. I'm going to trust all of you to do this with us. But if you get weird,
It's, we'll kick you out.
I'm tougher than ever before.
Yeah, all questions, I love questions, and I'm open to anything, and nothing is off the table, so please don't be shy. Nothing. I shouldn't say that. But if anyone's read my first book, Tomboyland, you'll know that nothing is off the table. Thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to read very briefly from this new book, this novel, Hemlock, which just came out. It's been a wild ride, and I'm really glad it's in the world, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of a taste, a little vibe of what's to come if you haven't read it yet. And then we'll talk about it. Okay, so if anyone's reading along, this is chapter 2. I'm not going to read all of chapter 2, but I'll read you something. It wasn't so much that Sam decided to leave. It was more like the leaving had been decided for her, that some external force had compelled her to go, then carried her all those miles. She packed 2 bags, threw them in the back of her '95 Mazda. Her grandfather, a General Motors man who had worked the line his whole life, no doubt rolling in his grave, and, not looking back, as she shifted into 5th on the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, pretty much vanished. She left at night. The streets of New York and the tunnel and turnpike oddly empty, though it wasn't that late. She drove west, through New Jersey and Pennsylvania, across that endless stretch of I-80, skirting Lake Erie and heading halfway through Ohio, where she pulled over at a truck stop not long before dawn and slept until the sun rose over the Sunoco sign. She pressed on through Indiana, past the thick green stink of Gary, and into Chicago. The traffic at midday, not bad, but not good either. Then north, across the state line. Through Beloit and Monroe, where her grandparents had both worked in factories, and where her mother had too. Then on through Janesville, past the burnt-out husk of the GM plant, where her grandfather had assembled chassis for over 40 years, before things got bad, and GM went bust, and everyone, including her grandfather, had lost their pensions. He died a few years. It's really good. It's just like a little bit of a beat. See if I can read. He died a few years later, just before he planned to retire, leaving her grandmother broke and alone with a new set of suitcases. They'd never been out of the state, had planned to drive across the country, maybe get on a plane for the first time, cross an ocean, and see the world. She passed the exit for her hometown as the sun began to set again and stepped on the gas. She wasn't ready to go back there yet, wasn't sure if she ever would be. She skirted the capital city, its lakes and rivers shimmering in the dusk, and drove north. Even as darkness fell, she knew the way by heart. The small handful of turns had been imprinted on her body before she ever knew the names of the roads. She knew exactly where, just north of Mozambique, the smell from the paper plant, fishy and thick, would blow in through the windows. She knew the very moment when the long stretches of farmland turned in a blink to pine. She knew the billboards, weathered to white, advertising divorce lawyers and adult mega stores and the world's largest cheese emporium. Reminders that abortion stops a beating heart and God is watching. She knew the crumbling bunker that was once a military armory, a hulking cement mass now swallowed by weeds. She stopped only so often to stretch her legs and refill her coffee, hitting the same gas stations she knew from her youth, the same glowing signs like lighthouses in the middle of landlocked nowhere. She bought dusty bags of beef jerky and Sour Patch Kids to keep her mouth busy, wanting badly for a cigarette instead. She promised herself she wouldn't buy a pack until Wausau, but only made it as far as Portage. She bought Newports, a brand she hated, the smell bringing back bad memories, the kind that worked its way into your clothes, into the carpet, and stayed. She bummed American Spirits from her friends back in New York and occasionally bought a pack, though she never called herself a smoker. But Newports had been her mother's brand, and her grandmother's before her, and when she spotted the teal and white package behind the counter, it had called to her. And anyway, they'd passed everything else down, so it felt right. The best way she knew to pay homage to the women who raised her. To the line, she said, aloud to the night outside a crumbling mobile station near the prison where Jeffrey Dahmer had been locked up and then killed. She slipped the plastic off the pack and tossed it in the bin between pumps, slid a cigarette between two fingers and raised it in silent salute. Above her, the fluorescent lights flickered and then blinked out, like the street lights always seemed to back in Brooklyn whenever she passed beneath them. In the car, she smoked with the windows down, the menthol making her lips go numb. She passed the exit to Plainfield, where Ed Gein had made his famous lamps and leggings of women's skin. She turned the radio up, the Allman Brothers singing through blown-out speakers about gypsies and freight trains and crossroads. She sang along, even as the signal faltered and fuzzed, flicking ash at the blackened highway that disappeared behind her. She hadn't been home in years. She wasn't sure how long. She wasn't even sure she could call it home anymore, or if it had ever really been. Still, driving these empty roads at night, the roads she knew so well, it was as if she had never left. She felt the tug of something. Nostalgia, probably. Regret, almost certainly. Longing, maybe most of all, for something she'd never really had. For the hope of what might have been, had things been different. Whatever it was, she knew one thing for sure. No matter how far she ran, this place always called her back. I'll stop. I heard some specific laughs at some Wisconsin, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
So, I had a different question prepared, but after hearing you read that and also talking to you at dinner, I think it'd be helpful for us to talk about how do you think road trips or driving, especially through the Midwest, fuel your creative process?
Great question. In fact, I'm doing it right now. I am doing a month-long tour in the Midwest, and I focused like the breadth of my tour in the Midwest because I'm a Midwestern writer, even though I'm not living in the Midwest right now. All of my books and all of my writing are always about the Midwest. I always return to it in my work, as you know. This book is very Midwestern, and people always pass over the Midwest, and I've never gotten to do this before. My first book came out in 2020, never gotten to tour, so I'm doing it big, and I'm doing it hard, and I'm driving everywhere. And I rented this car, and they gave me this like massive, like behemoth vehicle that I was like, oh no. But it's got great all-wheel drive, so I'm like feeling pretty good about it. But it's been really excellent to drive like 3 to 4 hours between every city and watch these landscapes pass that I know really well. And just to be reminded of how beautiful the Midwestern landscapes are. I was driving from Madison up here today in western Wisconsin, which is just so gorgeous. And so just to be like immersed in these roads and just driving around the Midwest, it's always been a favorite pastime of mine, driving around this part of the country. And I did a lot of driving growing up and as a young person, and I feel like there's so much story in Midwestern roads and Midwestern drives, and we drive everywhere if we can, you know, like I will avoid flying, and I am avoiding flying right now, and it just feels like home in this way, and liminal spaces in my work, and being on the road is a liminal space. You are between places, and you are just sort of out there, and you don't always know where you are, which is great. But you're just sort of in between. I love that.
I love that too. So, your book has been billed as, and I love this copy, as a Bush Black Swan. I'm sure everybody keeps bringing it up.
I mean, best tagline. I'm not
Best
gonna lie.
But the more, like rereading it over the weekend to prepare for this, one thing I thought was really interesting, and I don't mean this like the Midwestern passive aggressive way, but I mean it's a genuinely weird book where you're blending thriller, you're blending family drama, you're bringing in elements of horror and also the unknown. What do you think it is about the Midwest, especially where to the rest of the country we have this reputation of this place is so wholesome. Everybody but you see what is actually going on here in some ways. Can you talk more about that?
Absolutely. There's another really short passage that I'm thinking about, and maybe I'll read it to you if we have time. I mean, this book in like the entrance into kind of like the horror elements are really about, this book is very much like steeped in folklore and mythology, and I'm so interested in the mythologies of the place. And every place has a specific mythology that's like woven into its the fabric of its whole being. And growing up in Wisconsin and living in Wisconsin for so long, like
So this most dirty sound if you said Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, it really comes out. It comes out when I come home. It's like, it's so, I mean, I touched on it in that excerpt, you know, there's like all this long history of serial killers. And it's just like a weird place where a lot of weird, horrible stuff has happened. I mean, like real horrors that were truly part of like the mythology to my childhood. Like we talked about Jeffrey Dahmer, like he was this like, you know, this ghost that was haunting our state. And when you're a kid, that seems very far away. And I like to write about that in this book, like being kind of confronted with this like grisly history of a state's past, my state's past. It's fascinating. And then beyond that, like there are so many sort of like cross-cultural stories of monsters in the woods, and like I feel like every culture has one. So I was really interested in like digging into the actual mythologies of this place, the Northwoods of Wisconsin, in this book, and like digging into those mythologies and those horror stories, those ghost stories that we grew up telling, and how this can be haunted by those stories. When they came up with the Bush Black Swan tagline, I was like, Black Swan, really? But then the more I thought about it, I was like, oh yeah, I mean, there's a transformation, it's an unreliable narrator, we don't know what's going on, she doesn't know what's going on, we don't know what's real or imagined, so it kind of tracks. And it's definitely Bush.
Alright, now I'm gonna backtrack because I prepared this question assuming that we weren't gonna be faced with only Melissa superfans. Although I think we are, but I still think, especially because you're already touching on it, it'll be helpful for you to talk about it. Can you give us just this is gonna be hard for you as a memoirist too. Can you give us just a brief autobiography of your writing life?
Brief, we'll keep it nutshell. I was really interested in creative nonfiction from the beginning. That's where I got my start. That's where I'm trained. I think I identify as an essayist. If you ask me what kind of writer I am, that's how I identify. Because it's also how I think about the world and I think about things, and I find my way through a question or an idea or a problem or an obsession through writing an essay. And I went to an MFA program for creative nonfiction, and my first book was an essay collection, and never really conceived of myself as a fiction writer at all. I wrote stories when I was younger. I did actually write like little books when I was a kid. I was really into like making my own books, and they were all novels, like a 10-page novel.
The best life.
there should be more 10-page novels out there. But I've always been interested in fiction. I read a ton of fiction, and I had a couple different novel starts that I didn't think were worth pursuing. I would hit like 100 pages and just be kind of bored, and always be called back to the essay. And when I published Tomboyland, I say that I was really sick of writing about myself, but what's true is that this book is like, it's not about me, but Sam is a shadow version of me. Sam is this version of me who is like a thought experiment. Like, what could have happened had I made different decisions? Sam has struggled, I think, a lot more than I did, but we certainly share some struggles and some backstory. But I was really, the genesis of this was that I was staying alone in a cabin in the Northwoods of Wisconsin and finishing Tomboyland. And I was alone, like super alone, super remote. It was in the springtime, so no one was there. If you know the Northwoods, like, it's dead until May or June. And I was alone in this cabin for 6 weeks. And there was no Wi-Fi, and there was no cell service. It would like show up in the morning. I would have like bars on my phone, and then inexplicably it would go away at night. I kid you not. It's like straight out of a horror story, but like it was gone by 5 p.m. It was like the SOS logo on my phone. And so I got there and I was like, oh, this is actually kind of scary. Like, I love this place, and I had never felt afraid of it before. And then suddenly I was alone, and I was like imagining all of the things that could happen and go wrong. A storm could hit, and the power could be out for days, and then whatever else is lurking in the woods, right? Like, I was just hearing things at night, and the cracks sound so loud when something steps on a twig. It's like thunderous. So I got this idea for this book about like this part of the world that I love and that I was increasingly interested in writing about. And I would sit on the porch at night and have a beer, and suddenly this doe started coming to the yard, and I was feeding the doe, which you're not supposed to do. That's illegal. I'm not endorsing feeding deer. But I was doing it, and it was something that my mom had done, and it was like this idea, like I started thinking about the things that we like, these like rituals we carry on, these practices we carry on, even if we know they're not good for, the environment or ourselves. And this doe was showing up, and I was like saying hi to her every night, and I imagined her talking back, and that's pretty much where this book was born. There's a talking doe in this book.
I have questions about the talking doe.
We can get into that. So here for one.
Oh, there are two pathways, for I think I'm gonna make you stick just a little more with your writing life, and then we'll go so deeply more into Hemlock.
Okay.
And all of you, you've got like 15 minutes to start thinking about your question. So for those of you who are, you need the processing, get ready. Can you talk just a little more though about the difference in your processes? Where do you see that there's a different creative or artistic process between writing essays and then, but of course, the novel?
Yeah. In some ways it's totally different, and in some ways it's really similar. I think that what was true of this novel is that I had no idea what I was doing, and that's always true of an essay. I have no idea what I'm doing when I start. I have no idea where it's going. Literally, I never know. And I just sort of follow it. And that was true of this book also. I had this kind of like journey of a story, and I just started writing, and I just started following it. And I was just sort of like, I was having fun, honestly. I didn't think necessarily anything would come of it. I didn't necessarily think this was going to be a project that I would try to sell. I was just having a really good time, and I started following these threads, and it's like weird stuff started happening, and then this is where the differences in the processes show up, because the weird started happening, and in an essay, I love it when it gets weird, and I follow the weird. Then you've really got to like rein it in an essay and kind of like bring it back to the central question or the idea And in writing this book, I was like, oh, I can just let it get weird and continue getting weird and weirder. And I don't necessarily have to explain everything, and I don't need to tie it necessarily back to everything. Like, these threads can kind of exist on their own. And these characters started emerging, like, in the woods of my mind. And they were just sort of, like, showing up. And I was like, ooh, who are you? And I could just follow them. And I got really into writing dialogue, which was, it turned out, the way that I could really, like, find out who these characters were, which is something I don't do in nonfiction. I do some dialogue in nonfiction when I'm, like, interviewing people and working some, like, reportage into my personal essays, but this was different. They were, like, you know, sort of these people who existed outside of me, and I would put them in a situation and have them talk to each other, and I just kind of, like, followed the dialogue where it led me, and it taught me a lot about who the characters were, and what they wanted, and what they were running from, because they're all running from something, pretty much, what they have found on their path. So that was super fun, and like, really kind of mystical in some points. I was like, oh, is this my brain, or have I, like, summoned some something, you know? Like, it just, these characters felt summoned sometimes.
I'm so excited because you're keying up my next question. It's driving me with someone just gives me such a set. So, Melissa already did this spoiler about the fact that there's a talking deer in this book. And if you are hesitating around buying this book, there's a talking deer who's also very funny. And so I wanted to ask you, how did you create a talking deer as a character? A lot of the most memorable dialogue comes from her. She also maybe gives you the most insights in some ways into Sam, because Sam is such a withholding character, and this deer is always just pushing her. I feel a little wild saying this, but this deer is always just pushing her buttons or forcing her to say a truth in some way.
Yeah.
So how did you do this?
That's a good question. I think that, like, the first conversation I had on the page between this doe and Sam, I was like, I didn't know what she was going to be. I just had this idea of this, like, kind of like oracle-like creature. Kind of like, you know, she's a little bit of a shit talker. She was like, but she also, like, gives it to Sam straight, and nobody is giving it to Sam straight. You know, because they're all Midwestern. But she becomes this kind of, like, maternal figure. She reminds Sam in many ways of her missing mother. Her mother had disappeared many years earlier in this place, in these woods. So she's returned to this place where her mother vanished. So this doe has some maternal qualities and shares some of her mother's traits, I think. But is certainly more, I think, outspoken and snarky than I imagined Sam's missing mother to be. But I think that, like I was saying about the way that I was sort of just writing dialogue to learn about a character, I just kind of put these two next to each other, and Sam was always sitting on the porch drinking a beer, and this doe was always at the feeder, and would say things to Sam, and Sam would, you know, kind of, like, respond with this knee-jerk reaction, and she feels really called out, and it created this dynamic that I thought was really fun. And this is a dark book, I'm not gonna lie to you. It is dark. It's heavy, and I knew that I wanted there to be some light in the book, and some levity, and some humor, and so the doe became this way for me to imbue this pretty dark story with some humor, and it was really fun. It was just really fun to write her. After I published the book, I found out, someone told me that there's actually a rule in fiction that you can't have a talking animal if there are humans in the story. And I was like, what?
It's just
Like, who wrote that rule?
It's just like your old professors tell you that, like, I stopped reading when there was a talking animal,
Yeah.
and then everyone's like, oh, it's a rule.
Yeah.
Instead of like,
Well,
oh, you're so boring.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
don't want to try anything new.
I think what's funny is that because I didn't go to school for fiction, I didn't learn all the rules, and so I broke them without knowing that I was breaking them. And I was not like, I didn't have the little, like the old like
Yeah.
curmudgeonly professor on my shoulder telling me what I couldn't do. So, whatever. Some people might have a problem with it, but I think it was really fun. And I love a talking animal. I mean, I've never been mad at finding a talking animal in a book.
I haven't either, to be honest. And I also think the other thing is, I mean this, because I think anytime someone hears like a hint of criticism, like it's, but I think that the book might have been too dark about it,
Yeah.
where you needed this mixture of, so often when people write psychological distress, it's like everything is really bad all the time rather
Yes.
than a mixture of tones and understandings.
Which is what life is actually.
Yeah,
like.
and it's
Even
what
in
you
your
look at.
darkest periods, like
Yes.
there are moments of you laugh still, and you have moments of people
Yeah.
or animals.
Who really see you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and she sees them, and I think that's an important part of the story too.
So much of this book is about absences and how little you're putting these people who are trying to understand one another, sometimes in the same space. I thought it was really interesting. And this was more of a question I might have asked you later, but I think you're already touching on this of, especially because one of the rules of fiction usually is like, you bring these people into the same space and that builds the conflict, but one of the things that you do really interestingly is you let memory work often as a way to instigate conflict. Or you let regret, where it's not even maybe true memory, but the way that someone's perceived how the other person might perceive them. And that's what's actually building the narrative tension through some of Sam's thoughts or feelings. How often did you know what memories to build into this book? Or how does memory even work for you as a writer?
That's a really good question. Yeah. I think because I'm an essayist, I do a lot of reflection, and so there was a lot of reflecting on Sam's part, and it's told in close third. So I was, trying to get into her head and get into her memories, and I was also really interested in this book, moving sort of non-linearly through time, and I wanted time to feel a little bit like fluid and a little strange. So there's also a lot of movement between past and present,
Yeah.
and there's really this kind of vacillation between past and present. So we're moving back into these memories that she has with her mother, with her partner who's back in New York, just her as a kid, in this place, remembering her youth, kind of growing up in this place, which I think is always true of places that we return to, like we're just sort of re-immersing ourselves in old memories as we write new ones. But she's alone in the woods, and
Yeah.
so it's an incredibly interior experience. She's just thinking, she's alone with her brain and her thoughts and her memories, and she's kind of contending with those memories. She's confronting, I think, some of them. Like the last time she saw her mom, this shows up as a memory in the book, and that's how we learn kind of about her mother and her mother's struggles with addiction, and this kind of like ultimate break from reality that she had, while Sam is sort of like losing her own mind. So yeah, I think memory is a way that I certainly when I write nonfiction, I think it's how I build a story through both present action and memory, and I think that writing this novel was very similar in that way. And I got to know these other characters through dialogue, and I think I got to know Sam through like interiority and reflection. What is she thinking about as she's like fixing this rotting deck? As she's sort of like, there's a transformation narrative, I'm not going to say much, but in this kind of like experience of transformation, what is she thinking about? What is she remembering? What is she afraid of?
Let me give you a lighter question.
Okay.
Because I know I'll give you like 3 very heavy intellectual questions. Why don't you tell us what works influenced you that are not books and are not short stories or essays, what are the things, and you don't have to do words, what are the aesthetics or things that you see of Hemlock that you're not giving everybody additional reading?
No reading assignments. It's a great question. Well, horror for sure. I grew up loving horror, and I still love horror. I read horror. I watch horror.
You've got to pause for a minute.
Okay.
What's your favorite horror movie?
The Shining, which this book pays some homage to. There's actually a line from The Shining in this book. A little nugget for you to find. I just feel like that movie. Not to go too deeply into the movies, but
say whatever you want. This is your night.
the book and the movie. The book is really excellent too, and the book gets even deeper into that that psychological mess that is Jack and his brain and his sort of descent into madness. And I just love that character's relationship to alcohol, which is kind of how I build Sam's. It's she's been sober for a while, 10 months actually, which is also a reference. But she's sort of battling this. She's haunted by it, and so that's always been one of my favorite horror stories. But it was really present in my writing of this. I reread it. I actually started rereading it when I was alone at the cabin, and I was like, no, I don't do that. So I held on to that and did that later. But then I actually watch that movie every year, usually in February, because it's so great. But
February.
because it's so cold and wintry and depressing, and if it snowed, it snowed in North Carolina, which was miraculous, and so I watched it in January, at the end of January when it snowed. It's just so you really get into the mood. But otherwise, so horror, I love werewolf stories, vampire stories, which have always been so queer coded to me. Right? It's so weird that anyone thinks otherwise ever. But they're both transformation narratives. They're both fueled by desire. And this book is very much about desire and hunger. And this transformation is sort of summoning these desires and hungers that Sam has not allowed herself to feel or experience, I think, in her previous form. So certainly horror and transformation horror. And then the other thing that I had in mind a lot when I was writing this book, this is a deep cut for Midwestern writers, but there was a really excellent literary magazine, which sadly no longer is extant, called The Midwestern Gothic. It was so good, and I found it one year, 2010, at AWP, and I spotted it in among the 10,000 tables, and was I'm gonna publish in that one day, without even reading it. And then I read an issue and was this is so beautiful, and I met the editors, and I did get published in it a couple years later, and it was an essay that ended up in Tomboyland, and it was called Driftless. Not an essay that I would ever identify as being Gothic in any way, but then I started thinking about what Gothic means and what it means beyond the parameters of horror and speculative, and ghostly hauntings. But it's so place based, and it's about how places are haunted often. And in that essay, as in this literary magazine, it was often about place and landscape, and so I started thinking then about how, in particular, the landscapes of Wisconsin, like many landscapes of the Midwest, are both beautiful, as I was saying before, and lush and alive, and terribly brutal and very cold and very isolating, and they are both of those things at once. So I wanted to really dig into that idea of how land can hold both of those things and be both of those things, all of those things, and that to me kind of drove this idea of what a Midwestern realized at some point along the way as I was revising this book that I wanted to write a queer Midwestern Gothic. That was like the thing that I had in my head. And what would that look like and what shapes could it take? And so that's kind of as the torch.
I think you should just keep going a little bit,
Okay.
both because this is really good. But tell us a little more things that are Midwestern Gothic to you.
Okay, your
Or you
books.
can do Midwestern queer Gothic too.
Okay. Yeah, definitely your
Because I think you
books.
could tell a little bit.
Megan Giddings writes what I would call Midwestern Gothic for sure.
I do live in that lifestyle.
Right? Yeah, like weird stuff is happening in the Midwest in all of your novels, and yeah.
You live in a beautiful place and it's also hell. And
Exactly.
I love it so much.
And we
because
should
of
miss
this.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So definitely yours. I think Louise Erdrich writes the
yeah.
Midwestern Gothic really well, and she's writing about her experiences, well, her characters' experiences, but she's writing what I would think of as a native Midwestern Gothic. And like there are so many ghosts in her books, and her characters are so haunted. And two books that I that were like really important to me as I wrote this were The Roundhouse and The Sentence. The Roundhouse I read I definitely at least read twice, and yeah, just like the way that she moves through space and the ways that people are haunted in her works.
I love the Roundhouse so much.
So good. It is so good. If you haven't read it, I am giving you homework. Read The Roundhouse. I've got a copy in here somewhere. It's so good. It's so good. And it
Also, sometime I'll tell you, I had the worst teaching experience of my life teaching that.
okay. That's a difficult book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I can imagine. What else? I kind of want to I don't
This is how you constrain the books. Anything that comes to your mind around this concept, because I think it both makes sense, and also I think that it's so rich and that we could lean into it.
Well, there isn't a
Especially-
lot, and I think that's part of it.
And you're also living in the South, which hogs the idea.
It
of
sure
Gothic.
does, yeah. And I respect the tradition of the Southern Gothic, and I'm like more into it now that I live in the South. But I also grew up part of my horror education was Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, which made me fall in love with the South and with particularly this idea of Louisiana and these old crumbling mansions, that idea of rot and decay is a big part of how I think of the Gothic. And there's a thread in Hemlock about rot, and this cabin is basically rotting. So I think that idea of rot is kind of crucial to a lot of Gothic work.
This is true. And everything here is rotting. Never mind. Yeah, culturally, live. Every lake smells like rot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's a big part of this kind of Gothic too. The natural world is a huge part of this book, and one of the kind of central metaphors is the Eastern Hemlock, which I promised my friend Christy I would tell her about, which I found out only as I was researching this book, which had a different title originally.
Are you letting us what the original?
Maybe. No, I will, because there's a story behind it. But I was researching, which I love to do, and I was researching trees and just the trees of this place, which I sort of know, but also really wanted to learn more about. And I found out that the Eastern Hemlock, which is a species of pine, is endangered on the East Coast, and its endangerment is moving westward. And right now, in real life, in the real world, it's sitting on this meridian between Michigan and Wisconsin, which is essentially Lake Michigan. So it's somewhere in Lake Michigan right now. It's on the precipice of endangered and threatened. So in Wisconsin, its status is threatened, which is not as bad as endangered,
Right.
but it's coming, and like the endangerment is coming, and this like process is on its way, and when I read that, I was like, oh man, that was like such a perfect central metaphor for this book, because Sam is in this place too.
Yeah.
She's not quite endangered yet, but she's definitely threatened. So that was about the time that I changed the title. Do you want me to tell you what the first title was?
Yeah.
So I was working on this book for the kernel of the idea started in 2019, and I think I started writing in earnest in 2020. Finished my first draft in like 2021, like first real, like this is a book. I called it a book for the first time in 2021, and it had this title that I loved, and I was just so in love with it. And it was always the title. It was the identity of this whole book. And then this book came out with the same title.
No.
And it won a bunch of awards.
No.
Oh, no. I don't want to try to guess. No, I'm not going to do this in front of you.
It's called Lakewood. No, but although I will say, if you want a hint, the word wood is in it.
Oh, is it the Daniel Mason?
Yes,
Oh,
Northwoods.
yeah.
Yes. It was one
I would
word.
have lost my mind.
Yeah. It was one word. Daniel Mason's is two, but that's how we talk about the Northwoods in Wisconsin, is it's one word. But my agent was like, you gotta change it. Like this book is beloved, and everybody is. I still haven't read it. I have to tell you, I have a copy of it, and everyone who knows me is like, you gotta read this book, you're gonna love it. And I'm like, no, I will not. And I've opened it up like 3 times, because I'm like, I know I'm gonna love it. I know I'm gonna love this book. And I literally have opened it, and they're like, no, can't do it.
Like
I'm
the
just a
Kate nemesis.
It's kind of my nemesis, yeah. So I had to change it. But I think that like when I discovered the hemlock tree metaphor, then it felt really right to me, and Northwoods felt right too. But this book is also about like language and meaning, and how a word can have many meanings. A person can take many shapes and have many meanings, and so hemlock has multiple meanings also.
Honestly, Hemlock's a little better.
You think so?
Just a little bit.
Okay. I'm gonna trust you.
Northwoods, I mean, it's a beautiful title, but it doesn't get into that metaphor and all the layers and stuff. No, you should feel good.
Right. Maybe I'll read Daniel Mason's book at some
Oh, we
point.
don't have.
Okay.
I'm sure it's really good.
I've
It's
heard.
just the number of people who are like,
Yeah, has anyone read it? Yeah, is it good?
Yeah.
Okay.
what do we have to read?
Alright.
Okay.
Thank you for that permission.
You mentioned, I'm trying to balance time well here. You mentioned possibly reading just a little more. Do you want to do that? Or do you want to just keep talking?
I feel like I wanna leave room for audience questions
Okay.
too. So I think I would rather do that. But I mean, I'd read to you all night if you wanted, but I also really want to know what your questions are, and I'd love to answer them. So, is that where we're at with time?
I think.
Maybe 15 minutes, I'd say we've got on this. Yeah.
Okay. 15 minutes left.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe you have another question.
I'm gonna ask. Okay, I'm gonna do the warning. I'm gonna ask one more question. Then it's all you if you want it, and if not, I'll keep asking questions.
And yeah, I can also read a little bit more if there's. If there's no questions.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Yeah. No, now I understand. Yeah. Because for a minute I was like, oh yeah. So, one last. Okay, would you prefer to talk about Sam, or do you want to talk conceptual? Where do you feel?
Let's go conceptual.
Okay.
I'm here for the conceptual.
So, I had already mentioned the ways that you're moving through time in this, but I think it could be interesting to hear more of when, because you don't explain what's going on. You really don't.
If you
Yeah.
want answers, you're not going to like this book.
Yeah. In
answers.
To me, that makes the book better because you're doing this trust exercise of some of you gotta love it, but it's more of this idea of there's enough subtext, and all of you seem like excellent readers. You will understand exactly what's going on here. Not to shade anyone.
No, I think you're right.
Yeah, no.
I think you're all gonna figure it out.
I think you're all gonna figure it out. I think you're all gonna find a rich reading experience because Melissa let you figure it out. But how did you decide not to tell people what's going on? Because that's one of the hardest risks of a book, is that you can sometimes get told like halfway through the process, we could sell 1 million books,
Yeah.
but what if you told everybody what's going on and completely change everything you're doing?
Yeah. Luckily, no one told me I had to do that, so I was really, because I was like, this is so ambiguous. But I love ambiguity. That's just what I like writing, and it was really important to me that this book feel very open to interpretation, because that's sort of like what is at the heart of like the conflict of this story, is that Sam has sort of found herself at this like crossroads. It's Megan Giddings reference. And like she could follow this path that her sort of matrilineal line has laid out before her, the path of her inheritance essentially, or she could take this new path and do something new for herself, choose something new, break a cycle, break several cycles maybe. And she's sort of standing at the edge of this metaphorical woods and literal woods in her world throughout the book, and she could step into the darkness of oblivion, or she could stay in this clearing where the sun is still coming in through the trees. And like what's true of life is that there are no right or wrong answers, and that we always are just taking a path, and that there's no right or wrong way. I really believe that like we just keep taking paths, and we keep choosing paths, or sometimes a path kind of chooses itself for us and we follow. So I really wanted it to feel like many different things could be happening to this person and could possibly happen at the end of this story. She could go one way, she could go the other, because that feels really true to me about living. And I never know what I'm doing. I'm just like continuing down a path. Sometimes I choose a new one, and hope that it's like a meaningful one. And so that felt really right for this book, that it be both open to interpretation, for those reasons, and also because it's an addiction narrative too, and this is a main character who is altered through a lot of it, and so she's unreliable. She's an unreliable kind of narrator, and her experience is unreliable. She doesn't know what's happening, what's real, or what's imagined, and neither do we. And I wanted readers to feel that, and like be very immersed in that feeling of like, what is happening? What is going on? She wakes up in the woods from a blackout and is like, what did I do last night? And I wanted to translate that experience. What did I do last night? You know, like that's a very specific experience, and if you haven't had it, great, that's awesome. Good job. But those who have, like, know what I'm talking about, and that sort of fear of like, what could I have possibly done in this void of time and space that I no longer recall, that like doesn't exist in my brain. So I wanted it to feel disorienting like that. I'm so glad.
All right, do any of you have questions? All right, Chrissy, let's start with you.
Mood shift.
Yeah.
You said you researched all of the horror stories of the Northwoods and all of the mythologies.
At least a lot of them.
Okay,
I
well,
love
I'm
all.
sure you know about the Hodag, but like, what were your favorite?
She in here.
What were some other mythologies of the Northwoods that you turned up in the process?
Okay, so the Hodag, if you're not familiar with the Hodag is a creature of Rhinelander, Wisconsin, and the Hodag is in this book. There's just one mention of the Hodag.
Oh, it's not like I solved the problem right
No.
now.
But the Hodag example of one of these creatures of the woods that is like kind of horrific, that eats children or something, if I'm remembering correctly, is like definitely an eater of humans, and is like this horned beast that tromps through the woods, and then Rhinelander like named their sports teams after it, which is amazing. What else did I learn about? I think the Wendigo's in here. Yep. And also, well, I had a bunch that then ended up getting cut, but I'm trying to think if there's anyone in particular that I learned about. Most of the ones that ended up in the book I already knew about, but I learned more about them, like the Wendigo, which I think I always kind of like thought of as this like horned beast, right? Very similar to like that idea of the Hodak. But I learned that like the actual sort of story of the Wendigo is like it's an emaciated human, essentially, this like creature of hunger and that can never be satiated. So that was something definitely that I did not know that I learned that also felt like a great metaphor, you know, that like it keeps consuming and consuming and consuming and never gets full. So I think it was more like details around the stories that I learned. There's so many.
Hey, thanks for
Hi.
being here.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
I haven't read the book yet, but I'm very eager to. And I'm an avid horror movie fan and an avid reader. And
Right.
there's a Venn diagram that's been happening over the last few years. And I feel like with horror films, I often ask myself, like, what is this movie hoping I sit with? Like, what is the movie asking me to like hang out in? I'm curious, what would your answer to Hemlock be with that question?
That's a great question.
No spoilers.
Yeah. No spoilers. I think I am asking you to sit in ambiguity. I'm asking my readers to sit in uncertainty, and just to kind of like let yourself be there in that uncertainty, and to kind of like let go of control over your own narrative, over the narrative of the story, maybe. That's probably it. Yeah.
Hi. This is a question for both of y'all, actually. So, the world's been tough for queer folk and for black folk in particular. As of late, and both of you write about horror. I have not read your work, but I'm very intrigued to. Megan Giddings is my favorite horror books.
Hello, it's nice to
Hi.
meet you.
Black horror writers are important to me. So thank you for all the things you did for both of you. As the world becomes really complicated and harder, I think, for some of those marginalized communities, what is the role of like marginalized folks in our relationship to horror, particularly contemporarily? I know I'm really fun at parties, so.
I would love to talk to you at a party about this. I mean, for hours, honestly.
I feel like you should absolutely go first, and then we have time.
Okay.
I'll say something,
Yeah, I'd love that.
but I know that we're a little slow.
Okay.
But I'll be around, so.
Okay.
Yeah. I would love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah.
For me in this book, I would say like, well, and just in general, I'm like fascinated by the intersections of queerness and horror and queer horror, and I really wanted to write into those intersections. I think in everything I write, I'm always writing about queerness, and I'm writing about gender and the body in particular, and like, so going back to those like transformation stories, I was like really interested in thinking about like this kind of like Sam's intersection being like both either a transformation of gender, like there is a kind of transition happening, or this transition into the monstrous, and then like in particular very fascinated by the monstrous, and even more in particular about like this idea that queer people, as we all know, are called monstrous and are considered monstrous, and there's like narratives of disgust that you so I'm really interested in the ways that, through this story, I think I was writing into this idea of like, when you hear stories about yourself for a really long time, you start to internalize them. And the work of the queer person often is to try to like exercise those stories, right? Like get those stories of monstrousness and the grotesque out of their belief, out of their bodies. And so I was like thinking about that, but then I was also thinking about this other idea that like came up at some point as I was writing this, that was like, well, what if we just leaned into the monstrous? Like, what if instead we become a monster? Like, maybe a monster has more power in like some situation of threat, right? So I was interested in that like dichotomy of exercising the monstrous, the stories of the monstrous, and turning toward the monstrous. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Maybe 2 more questions. something
Okay,
like that,
so I
yes.
can answer you in
Yeah,
that.
please.
So for me, some of it is I grew up with a very strict like you don't speak like African American vernacular English dad. I went from like a hotep dad to now he's terrifyingly become a little bit of a black conservative, which is yeah, it's been a devastating, but it's also kind of a natural cycle. Hotep to
It's not fun.
no, yeah. And I think that's some of been my influence of writing is he also really struggles with queerness, and it's weird because we both have had like a close relationship. But one of the things that I've like really profoundly moving is that when you write into being black, or for me being black and bisexual, you always get this sense of like, okay, most people are gonna like shut up, and then there's the people who are like, oh, we can be in these stories and we're not getting murdered, we can be in these stories and we're not cliches, we can have this identity, and you've given me a space where even if I don't agree with your representation of these things, it's still here and it makes it possible to actually have a conversation. And so it was hard for me at first because I was like, I want to get everything perfectly right. I want to make everybody feel seen and incredible, and that makes terrible fiction. Like the worst fiction you could ever write is like, this character is perfect to everybody, and she's gonna make no mistakes. And I think it's been really interesting then to put it in a horror space where so often you are kind of punished for both being black and then you're also punished for being queer. And then what happens when you keep being like, this person has to make it through, this person has to be the conduit for reality, so even if they don't make it entirely through, the reader still has to sit with this person that they might not usually get to sit with, or for some of them want to sit with. And I think it has not made my life easier, but it has made my creative life much more interesting and rewarding. And I feel really lucky to actually get to publish at this time, even though there's a lot of like still a lot harder things to deal with in publishing because of that. I have more to say, but I think we should ask one more question on this.
Thank you, bro.
Yeah.
No, thank you
Thanks for the
wonderful
question.
Chris?
Yeah, so you said early on that you still identify as an essayist. How do you feel like writing and publishing fiction has affected the way that you think about and write nonfiction?
That's a good question. I've written like 4 essays since this book like went into production. I would say I've probably finished 4 essays. It's 4.
Do you want me to ask a follow-up question for Chris's for a second?
Sure. Yeah.
Would you call them essays or the novelist essays? Not kind of similar?
Well, 2 of them were about writing the novel. So I will say they were like, 3 pub essays about
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. One, if people are interested in that, the story of Bush Black Swan, I have an essay in LitHub currently about that, about writing a queer Midwestern Gothic, basically.
It's a good essay.
Thanks. So yes, 2 were about the novel. The other 2 were not. I think that I'm really enjoying moving between fiction and nonfiction, and so it was really refreshing for me to then go back to essaying once I turned this book in, or once it became a novel. I'm not sure if anything changed, but I do think about what I want to make next, and I'm not sure. I have an essay collection that's probably closest to being finished, but I also have another novel project that's 100 pages in.
So cheat on one.
I kind of do. Yeah. But it feels right somehow. I don't know. I just
It's like a poly relationship.
It is. Yeah. I can love them both.
Yeah.
Equally, maybe. I don't know if I love them equally actually, but
That's okay too.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Maybe essays are still my primary.
Yeah.
But no, I really I just feel lucky to be able to do both, and hopefully I will be able to continue to write and publish with them.
Well, thank you all for coming out. Melissa, this was wonderful. Let's do a round of applause for Melissa.
Great questions. Thank you, Megan. We're gonna sign books back there.